A bottle shattered against the back wall of the bar. Glass exploded across the shelves. Another followed. Then a third. The man throwing them wasn't angry. He was calm. He was making a point. Two of his crew stood at the door, blocking it. Two more moved between the tables, grabbing customers by the collar, pulling wallets, telling people to stay in their seats and keep their mouths shut. Nobody ran. Nobody screamed anymore. The first scream had already done its job. Behind the bar, a bald man kept polishing a glass. He didn't look up. He set the glass down. He picked up another one. What did this gang of 6 men do when that bald bartender finally set down his glass and came around the bar? Stay with me on this one. The bar was called Callahan's. It sat on the corner of a side street in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, the kind of place that had existed long enough to absorb everything the neighborhood had thrown at it. Scarred wooden bar top, 6 stools, a jukebox in the corner that played old soul records when someone bothered to feed it quarters. The walls held framed photographs of fighters, baseball teams, politicians who had long ago stopped matching. The floor was dark tile worn pale in the walking paths. It smelled like beer and old wood and winter cold coming in around the doorframe. On a freezing Thursday night in February, there were 11 customers. A couple sharing a pitcher near the window. 3 men watching a basketball game on a mounted television above the far end of the bar. A woman in her 50s sitting alone at the end of the bar, nursing a whiskey the way people nurse things when the whiskey is not the point. 2 younger men playing pool in the back. And a table of 4 near the rear wall, talking quietly over their drinks, not in any hurry to go anywhere. A regular Thursday, a nothing night. Behind the bar was 1 man. No name on the schedule, no name tag, no paperwork of any kind. He had been there every Thursday for 3 months, and some Fridays when Mickey needed coverage. He arrived at 4, opened the place up, set up the bar, poured drinks, kept to himself. The owner, a man named Mickey Doyle, had hired him on a handshake deal, cash in an envelope at the end of each shift. The bartender had asked for that arrangement himself, the first and essentially only thing he had asked for. Mickey hadn't questioned it. He was 63 years old. He had run Callahan's for 22 years. He had learned a long time ago that some men come to a quiet place because they need quiet, and the right thing to do with those men is give them what they came for. The bartender's name was Jason Statham. He was 46. He had a shaved head that caught the bar light in a clean line. He had a jaw that looked welded on, a neck that suggested he had not always spent his time polishing glasses, and hands that were too large and too deliberate for the job he was doing. He wore a gray t-shirt and a canvas bar apron. When he spoke, it was in a low, even tone that made people lean in slightly to catch what he said. He never started conversations. He always finished them politely on his own terms, with a kind of quiet finality that most people accepted without entirely understanding why. The regulars liked him. Mickey liked him. Nobody knew anything about him, and the consensus, unspoken, was that nobody needed to. What Jason Statham had been before Callahan's was not something he discussed. It was not something he even thought about if he could help it, which most days he could. He had been somewhere else before this. Multiple somewhere elses. He had operated in contexts that do not appear on resumes and do not generate records that a person can look up. He had worked with governments and against governments. He had been in rooms where the decisions made would affect thousands of people who would never know his name. He had done things that were necessary. He had done things that were, by any civilian definition of the word, terrible. He had been trained to a standard that most people do not believe exists outside of fiction, by people who did not care whether he believed it was possible, only whether he could execute it. And then one day he had walked away from all of it. Not dramatically. Not with a crisis or a breakdown or a single decisive moment. He had simply reached the end of what he could keep doing, assessed his options with the same cold clarity he had applied to everything else in that life, and chosen a different direction. He had come to New York because it was large enough to disappear into. He had found Mickey's bar because it was quiet. He had asked for the cash arrangement because paperwork creates trails, and he had no interest in trails. 3 months in, he had begun to believe, cautiously, that he had found what he was looking for. That belief ended at 9:47 on a Thursday night when the front door of Callahan's came open and 6 men walked in. Their leader's name was Dario Vega. He was 29 years old, built wide across the shoulders, with a stillness about him that came not from peace but from certainty. He wore a black quilted jacket and moved through the bar the way men move through spaces they consider theirs. His crew spread out behind him with the ease of people running a practice play. 2 to the door, 2 across the floor, moving between tables. His right-hand man, a tall lean kid named Renzo, falling in just behind and to his left. They called themselves the West Side Kings. Over 2 years they had built control over a 4-block corridor of Hell's Kitchen through a combination of physical presence, selective violence, and consistent follow-through on every threat they made. They collected protection from 16 businesses. Bars, restaurants, a dry cleaner, 2 bodegas. The amounts were not large. That was not the point. The point was that the payments happened reliably every month, because not paying had consequences that the business owners had all seen demonstrated at least once. Dario ran it like a business because it was a business and he was good at it. Mickey Doyle had said no twice. The first time, Dario had sent 2 of his crew to break the front window and leave a note under the door. The second time, Dario had come personally, sat across from Mickey at the bar after closing, and explained very clearly what the third refusal would look like. Mickey had told him to get out. He had used a word before out that added emphasis. Dario had left. He had not been angry. He had been resolved. Tonight was the third refusal's answer. The 2 men on the floor moved between the tables. One of them grabbed the younger man sitting nearest the door by the collar of his jacket and told him to put his wallet on the table and not look up. The other moved toward the pool table. One of the pool players made a move toward the back hallway and got grabbed and pushed against the wall hard enough to knock a picture frame crooked. He did not try again. The 4 people at the back table pressed themselves into the corner booth. The couple by the window sat completely still, their hands flat on the table, not looking at each other. The television kept playing. The crowd noise from the basketball game sounded wrong in the room, like a sound effect from a different world playing through a speaker in this one. Dario came to the bar. He planted both hands on the bar top and looked at the bald man polishing a glass. He said, "Where's Mickey?" Jason set the glass down. He looked at Dario without hurry. He said, "Mickey's not in tonight." "Then I'm talking to you." Dario leaned forward. "Mickey owes me a conversation. You're going to have it on his behalf. You're going to take whatever's in that register and put it on the bar. Then you're going to call Mickey and tell him exactly what happened here tonight, so he understands that I don't make the same visit 3 times. Jason said nothing for a moment. He looked past Dario at the 6 men positioned around his bar, at the customers pressed against walls and booth backs and corner seats, at 11 people trying to make themselves as small as possible. He looked back at Dario. He said, "I can't do that." Dario's expression did not change. He turned and said something quiet to Renzo. Renzo moved down the bar toward the woman sitting at the far end. Her name was Carol. She was 53 years old. She was a retired schoolteacher who lived 4 blocks away and had been coming to Callahan's every Thursday night for 11 years. She drank 2 whiskeys, tipped generously, sometimes talked to Mickey, and was home by 11. That was her Thursday. Renzo put his hand on her shoulder. Not gently, the kind of grip that communicates its message without words. Jason's hands went flat on the bar top. He said, "Let her go." Dario turned back to him. He let the silence sit for a beat. "You said something? Let her go. She has nothing to do with this." Dario looked at Renzo. Renzo tightened his grip. Carol's eyes closed. She made a small involuntary sound, the sound of someone absorbing pain quietly because they have decided that is the better option. Jason came around the bar. There are men who move in ways that cause other men to step backward without consciously deciding to do so. It is not purely about size, though Jason was not a small man. It is something in the quality of the movement. The weight fully committed, no hesitation anywhere in the body, no checking for permission. He came around the end of the bar, and the two men on the floor both moved toward him at the same time, closing from different angles, and he handled both of them in 4 seconds. Not elegantly, efficiently. 2 precise applications of force to 2 specific anatomical locations, and both men were on the floor and the room had not yet fully registered that it had happened. Dario stared. Renzo released Carol's shoulder. Nobody moved for a moment. The jukebox had cycled to something slow. One of the men on the floor was making a low, continuous sound and holding his wrist. The other was on his side and was very still and was breathing, just not doing much else. The customers near the back booth had pressed so far into the corner that they were essentially one object. Dario straightened up. He looked at the 2 men on the floor. He looked at Jason standing between them in the center of the bar, unhurried, not even breathing hard. He did a calculation behind his eyes, the kind of quick running tally that men in his line of work are good at. He reached a conclusion. He held both hands up, open. He said, "All right, we're done here. Message delivered. Mickey knows what he owes." He said it flatly, without retreat, like it was his decision and not a response to anything. He nodded to Renzo. He nodded to his 2 men at the door. He picked up a bottle from the bar almost conversationally, looked at it, set it back down. He looked at Jason one last time. "Mickey ought to get better help," he said. He walked toward the door. The room exhaled in pieces. Carol let out a long shaking breath and pressed one hand to her chest. The couple at the window reached for each other's hands. One of the pool players straightened up from where he had been crouching behind the pool table. Jason watched Dario cross the room. He watched the door. He reached back and untied his bar apron and folded it over the bar top. A habit, a small physical signal to himself that the situation had passed. He rolled his shoulders once, slowly, and he stood still. The woman at the end of the bar started reaching for her coat. One of the men watching the basketball game let out a long breath. Dario's hand reached the door. He stopped. He stood still for 3 full seconds, his back to the room. Then he turned around. He said, "Lock it." The man nearest the door turned the deadbolt. The sound it made was very loud in the quiet bar. Dario reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a gun and held it at his side. He said, "I changed my mind. No witnesses." The room went still in a way that was different from everything before. What had been a shakedown had just become something without a clean ending. No version of no witnesses resolved with 6 people going home. Everyone in the room understood it at the same moment, and the understanding was physical, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with weather. Dario looked at Jason behind the bar. He said, "Starting with you." Jason set down the glass he had picked up. He looked at Dario. He said, "That's going to be a problem. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. This is where it turns." Dario raised the gun and the room fractured into motion. Renzo came around the bar. One of the men from the door moved left. Jason went under the bar top and came up with a bottle by the neck and threw it, not at the gun, not at Dario's head, at the space just in front of Dario's face. Dario flinched. That was the only variable Jason needed. In the flinch, he was already moving around the bar and inside Dario's reach, and there was a brief moment where 2 hands were on the gun. And then there was only Jason's hand on the gun, and Dario was looking at his own empty palm with genuine confusion. Jason walked to the back bar and set the gun on the high shelf. He turned around. He said, "Everybody not with him. Get to the far wall and stay there." The customers moved. Immediately, without hesitation, with the particular obedience of people who have just been told the exact right thing to do by someone who sounds like they know what happens next. They moved against the far wall, the couple, the 3 men from the television, Carol, the pool players, all 4 from the back booth, 11 people pressed together against the far wall of Callahan's bar, and they did not make a sound. The 5 remaining men spread out. Renzo came in from the left with a knife, low and fast, and it was a real attack, not a display, the kind of move that came from actual experience with a knife and what it can do. Jason stepped inside the angle, took the wrist, applied leverage, and the knife was under the bar before Renzo had processed what had happened to his arm. He put Renzo on his knees and stepped away, and Renzo stayed there, holding his arm at an angle it was not built to hold, breathing through his teeth. 2 of the men came together because that is the right instinct, use numbers, eliminate the space. They came through the gap between 2 bar stools. Jason used the stool. He used the narrow geography of the gap itself, which favored the single person against the pair, and met them in it, and the gap closed around all 3 of them, and when it expanded again both men were down and Jason was standing between them with his hands loose at his sides. The 4th man picked up a bar table. A full-sized bar table, both hands, lifted off the floor and thrown with genuine force and commitment. It was the kind of move that would have seriously hurt a man who was standing where he had been standing. He was not standing there anymore. He had read the shoulders before the table left the man's hands. He had read the weight distribution a full beat before the throw. He relocated and let the table crash into the bar front, and then he moved to the 4th man and placed 2 strikes with a precision that made the 4th man sit down against the wall like a marionette whose strings had been cut, and he sat there breathing carefully and did not get up. Dario had reached the far end of the bar. He had the gun back. He had found it on the high shelf. He had it in both hands now, leveled, grip steady, the stance of someone who has used a gun before. His eyes were not as steady as his hands. He said, "Stop." Jason stopped. 6 feet between them. The bar lay in wreckage behind and around them. 3 men on the floor. 1 against the wall. Renzo on his knees. The customers in a tight silent group against the far wall, not moving. The jukebox had finally gone quiet. The basketball game on the television continued, indifferent. Dario said, "Who are you?" Jason said, "Nobody. Nobody does not do what you just did." "I used to be somebody," Jason said. "That was a long time ago." Dario kept the gun up. He breathed. He calculated. "You move and I put a bullet in one of them," he said. He did not look at the customers. He knew exactly where they were. "You understand me. You move and one of them pays for it." Jason looked at the wall of people. At Carol still pressed against the plaster, her hand flat on her chest, her eyes on him. At the couple, together now, the man's arm around the woman's shoulders. At the others, 11 people who had come to a neighborhood bar on a Thursday evening and had not deserved any of this, not 1 second of it. He looked back at Dario. He said, "Put the gun down." Dario said, "Make me." Jason said, "I will, but you're not going to like how it happens." Dario laughed. Came out wrong. Too high, too short. Because the man on the other side of the bar was operating outside every rule set Dario had encountered in his life, and that created a specific kind of fear that Dario had not experienced before, and Dario Vega was not a man who accepted fear as a state to remain in. He swung the gun toward Carol. Jason was already moving on the first degree of arc. He was inside Dario's arm before the gun completed its swing. His left hand came up under the weapon and redirected it toward the ceiling. His right hand found the wrist. The leverage he applied to that wrist was precise and total, and Dario's hand opened not because he chose to release the gun but because his nervous system gave him no alternative. Jason caught the gun before it reached the floor. He did not let guns hit floors. Floors were variables he eliminated. He held Dario's wrist in one hand. He held the gun in the other. He was 8 inches from Dario's face. He said, "It's over." Dario's legs went. Not because Jason did anything further. They simply went. The way legs go when the calculation finally completes and the answer contradicts every assumption a man has been running on. He sat down on the floor of Callahan's bar, still upright against the bar front, and he looked up at Jason from there, and for the first time in his 29 years, Dario Vega had no next move. Jason stepped back. He looked at the gun in his hand. He walked to the door and checked the deadbolt, then walked to the high shelf and set the gun there again in the same spot. He turned around and looked at the room. He said, "It's over. All of you." He said it to the 5 men. "Nobody moves. Nobody touches anyone. Sit down and wait." They sat. Even the men who were already on the floor seemed to settle more fully. Jason walked to the far wall. He looked at the 11 customers. He looked at Carol. She was still, her hands flat at her sides now, and she was looking at him the way a person looks at something that does not fit the category it appeared to be in. He said, "Is anyone hurt? Anyone need a doctor?" No one spoke for a moment. Then the woman from the couple said, quietly, that she thought she was all right. One of the men from the television group had a cut on his hand from a piece of glass. Not serious. Jason looked at him, nodded once, went behind the bar and came back with a clean bar towel and handed it to him. A bartender's response. Clean and direct. He looked at the room again. He said, "I'm going to open the door. You go out, go straight home. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone on the street. If you want to call the police, do it when you're home." He walked to the door. He turned the deadbolt. He pushed it open and the cold air came in hard and clean from the street. He stood at the door. The 11 customers filed out. The pool players first, then the 3 men from the television. The back table for not speaking, not looking back. The couple, together, the man holding the door for the woman as though it were the end of an ordinary evening and not because he needed something ordinary to hold on to, though probably it was both. Carol last. She stopped in the doorway. She was 53 years old and she had lived in this neighborhood for 26 years. She had watched it change around her, seen bars come and go, seen men come and go. She was not a woman given to large displays of any emotion. She looked at Jason and she said nothing. She nodded. Once, slowly, the way people nod when a word would be insufficient. She went. Jason pulled the door almost closed but did not latch it. He walked back to the bar. He picked up a glass. He began to polish it. The gesture was not theatrical. It was just what he did when he stood behind a bar and needed his hands to be doing something. He waited. The 5 men on the floor and Renzo on his knees and Dario against the bar front all stayed where they were. No one tested the open door. Whatever they had come in with, whatever certainty had carried them through that door 2 hours ago, it was completely gone. Jason had not taken it from them with anger or with theater. He had simply replaced their certainty with something larger, and the thing that was larger did not need to announce itself. After 20 minutes, the first of them got up. One of the men from the door. He moved toward the exit slowly, watching Jason the whole time, and Jason watched him back and said nothing, and the man went. Then another, then a third. Renzo got up, still holding his arm, and went without a word. The man from the wall moving carefully. Dario was last. He got up with the specific slowness of a man reassembling himself. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the bar, at the broken glass and the overturned stools and the table that had hit the bar front and cracked 2 of its legs. He looked at Jason behind the bar, polishing a glass in a room full of broken things, calm as a man who had never been interrupted. Dario said, "What are you?" Jason said, "Tired." The word sat in the room for a second. Not bravado, not a line, just the plainest answer to the question, and it had a weight to it that Dario felt even if he could not name it. Dario walked to the door. He pushed it open. The cold came in one more time. He did not look back. The door swung shut. The bar was quiet, completely quiet. Not the tense silence of people holding their breath. Just the plain, factual quiet of a room after everyone has gone. Jason set the glass on the shelf. He stood still for a moment. Then he reached under the bar and turned off the television. He straightened the bottles that were still standing. He righted 2 of the bar stools and set the cracked-legged table against the wall where Mickey would see it and know to get it replaced. He picked up the broken glass from behind the bar, piece by piece, unhurried, dropped it in the bin. He swept. He wiped down the bar top. He emptied the ice bin and rinsed it. He did it all the way he had done it every Thursday for 3 months, methodically, completely, because a bar deserves to be left right. He turned off the lights above the bar. He stood in the dark for a moment. The street light came through the front window in a single strip across the floor, pale and steady. He took off his apron and folded it and set it on the bar. He put on his coat. He took out a pen and a piece of bar napkin and wrote a note. He kept it short. He slid the key under the front door from outside after he pulled it shut, and he tucked the note under the key. The street was empty. The city made its sounds all around him, distant and continuous, entirely indifferent to what had happened in one bar on one side street on one cold night. He turned up his collar. He put his hands in his pockets. He walked. He did not look back. He knew, with the calm certainty of a man who has been through this particular transition enough times to recognize it, that he would not come back. Not because of Dario Vega. Dario Vega would not come back either. But because being visible is a condition you cannot undo. Once you have done something in front of witnesses, the thing is done, and you are what did it, and the people who saw it know something about you now that cannot be unknowing. He had broken his own rule. He had shown what he was. The only correct response was to move, and he moved. He would find another bar, another neighborhood, another handshake with another owner who needed reliable Thursday coverage. He had done it before. He was good at starting over. He was, if he was being honest with himself, better at starting over than he had ever been at anything else. Which was something. Mickey Doyle came in the next morning at 7 and found his bar rearranged and the register untouched and a note folded under the key on the floor. He read it twice in the empty bar. Said, "Sorry about the mess. The front door lock is stiff from the cold. Have someone look at it." He recognized the handwriting from 3 months of Thursday shift notes. Neat and spare and never a word wasted. He stood in the middle of his bar for a long time. He looked at the folded bar apron on the counter. He looked at the cracked table leaning against the wall and the swept floor and the wiped-down bar top and the bottles standing in neat order on the shelf. He looked at the note in his hand. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He got the broom and started on the glass he had missed near the pool table. Dario Vega was picked up 6 weeks later on a warrant unrelated to the events of that Thursday. He was held for 60 days. When he got out, he relocated his operation further west, into a territory with no history and no complications. When his crew asked why they were moving, he said the territory had changed. They asked how it had changed. He said it just had. He gave no further explanation then and none afterward, not ever. Some stories, he had decided, did not improve with the telling. Particularly the ones that ended with you sitting on the floor of a bar wondering what you had just encountered. The skill was something he could explain. Men could be trained to move like that, probably. He had heard of such things. But the choice at the end of it, standing there with a gun and a room full of options, choosing to put the gun on the shelf and pick up a glass and just wait, that part he could not explain. That part stayed with him. Carol came back to Callahan's the following Thursday. She sat in her usual spot at the end of the bar. Mickey poured her whiskey without asking. She looked at the stool behind the bar where Jason had always stood. She looked at the apron folded on the counter. She said, "He's not coming back, is he?" Mickey said, "No." She sat with that for a moment. She said, "Do you know who he was?" Mickey thought about it. He thought about the handshake and the cash arrangement and the neat handwriting on shift notes and the way Jason had always known when a glass needed refilling before the customer looked up to ask. He thought about the note under the door and the untouched register and the righted stools and the swept floor. He said, "Just a man who needed a quiet place for a while." Carol looked at her glass. She said, "He found one. Somewhere in the city. A man in a gray t-shirt and a canvas bar apron was opening up a different bar in a different neighborhood for the first time. He would learn the layout. He would remember the regulars after one visit. he would keep to himself. He would be good at what he did. He would arrive at 4 and leave when everything was straight. He would not start trouble. He would not be the reason trouble found anyone. But if it came anyway, if it came through a door he happened to be standing behind, he would do what he had always done. He would stand between it and the people who couldn't. Not because anyone asked him to. Not because of duty or because of pride or because some debt had come due. Because that is what you do when you are what he is, even when you have tried for 3 months to be something quieter. Even when you have buried the thing you were and walked away from it with both hands and every honest intention in the world. Some things will not stay buried. Some men are not built for quiet, and the city keeps offering them doors.